everybody, and welcome to another episode of Coffin Talk, interviews with the living. This is a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. And this week we have a guest from England, and his name is Colin Finch. He's a humanist, which means he's non-religious, and he's a funeral celebrant. He's been doing this work for the last 4 years, and he carries out about 2 to 3 services a month. And I'm just dying to ask him a lot of questions about that because we don't meet a lot of people who work in the industry. And as our listeners know, I used to do hospice work, so I'm incredibly interested in meeting fellow people who care about the subject. So with no further delays, Colin, how are you doing today?
Good evening, good afternoon. I'm fine. How are you?
Very good. Yeah, so what time is it there right now locally?
We are 9:15 p.m.
Okay, well, thank you for making time for us so late. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
And we always ask our guests 3 standard questions, which is how old are you, where did you grow up, and what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
Wow. So the first question, I'm 62 years old. In fact, I had a birthday last week, so that's difficult because you keep thinking you're the year before, don't you?
Totally.
Well, I grew up obviously it's probably not too obvious for people on that side of the pond, but I grew up in England, mainly around Cambridge, and I now live about 10 miles just north of Oxford.
Awesome. I used to spend a lot of time in London and Oxford, but I've been to Cambridge and it's great.
Yeah, Oxford and Cambridge. If you go to Oxford, you've basically been to Cambridge. They look the same. The people are the same. It's all the same.
You said it and I didn't because I didn't want to be that American. So
yeah,
cool. Well, I love your sense of humor and I love your attitude. I think the first question I just want to ask you is what got you into becoming a humanist funeral celebrant 4 years ago?
Okay, that's a question I've been asked quite a few times because it's a strange area of work. Obviously, I've never been religious, never, not even from school. So I was always really interested in the fact that faith seemed to have massive representation, but people with no faith seemed to be cast aside as if it was, we were called heathens and everything else, and there was nowhere to belong. And then the Humanist Society in the UK came along, and I joined them about 5 or 6 years ago. But that how I really got into this work is quite sad, really, because my dad died about 12 years ago, and I wrote a eulogy for him. And I'd seen a lot of people go up and do it, and I was extremely nervous. And I remember I wrote a piece, and I'd never seen this done before. I had some introduction music, which I'm sure your listeners will know. It's the Looney Tunes music. You know, the one that goes da 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 da.
Yeah.
That one. Because my dad and I and my brother always used to watch cartoons together.
Cool.
So I thought, well, let's do something. Let's mix it up a bit. So I did this, walked on, did the eulogy. People were laughing. At the end, everyone clapped, which was quite rare for a funeral in the UK. And I sort of thought, well, if I can do it for my dad, I could probably do it for other people. And it really sort of kicked off from there. And to be honest, I absolutely love the work. I mean, it's a strange area to be involved in, but I'm sure it's going to be one of your questions, but there's very few areas in life where you really think you can make a difference to someone's day, and I feel this is one of them.
That's an incredible answer, and that's part of what I was alluding to about my work in hospice is that, much like you, like people ask me all the time, like, why? And I mean, I have my, factory answer, but the real reason I kept doing it is the same as yours, and it's the emotional connection with people. And also, I just would like to let you know that you definitely made a great pitch, and I would love to have you do my funerals.
Well, I've got to live longer than you. That's the only problem there, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm 42, and you never know, so we'll see.
There you
happens.
go.
But no, it is. It's odd that people think you can't laugh at a funeral, that there's nothing funny and humorous in death. I mean, I know we lose people and we love them, and the idea of loss and grief is not typically going to be funny. But do you find that more people have a sense of humor about it than most people would think now that you're doing the work?
Oh, that is a good question. Now, I'll tell you what I really think about this. I'm doing one at the moment next week, and I'm writing the service as we speak. In fact, I was writing about half an hour ago, and they kept saying to me, the family, "Oh, make sure it's funny. Make sure it's funny." But sometimes there's got to be a balance here, because you can get carried away with the fact that you're up at the lectern, as we would call it, and you have a very passive audience. They're not going to heckle you, and the floor is yours for half an hour, 45 minutes. And to be honest, no one wants to be there. So anything that is remotely funny is a relief for everybody because it takes the pressure away, takes some of the grief away. But there are parts of the service that are unavoidable, which are incredibly sad. Obviously, the committal and the parts more towards the ends of the service. So you have to realize that you can't. This isn't a stand-up comedy show, but so it's the balance I find is the hardest thing. Not because I can throw in the comedy all day. I could write a lot of people. There's so many funny things in people's lives. You think this is just to laugh a minute, but you can't have that. Because there comes a moment when the curtains are going to close and the music starts and the coffin's on the catafalque and everyone has to file past it. So I just think, my answer to your question, it's a balance. Mm-hmm. It's a total balance. I think some people, my experience, I've seen people go too far with it and get carried away because they've had a good response and go too far. And then times I've seen people, it's been very dour. And you really don't want to be there. I mean, no one wants to be there anyway, but you know what I mean? When it's a service that doesn't bring any joy or memories to people. And I think that's the key to it, is giving people new memories. So people carry on talking about the deceased. That's my version of life after death, really, to be honest.
That's great. That's actually so intelligent and insightful, because I think that's really something people don't realize. And, I've had a lot of conversations with people about the purpose of funerals, and how they really aren't about the person who died. It's about the people who remain, obviously, but sometimes that isn't the case.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think in America, we have a harder time talking about death than in Britain, and I'm basing that on, I worked for a parent company out of Britain for 10 years of my life, so I would fly there all the time, and I would hang out mostly with Brits, and I get into a lot of arguments and fun conversations with America about cross-cultural differences between us, just specifically British folks and American. But one of the things I always try to hammer home is, like, you guys love The Office, but Ricky Gervais created The Office. Like, you got to see how much humor is a part of their culture.
Yep.
It's just not so damn obvious. You guys are a lot more subtle. I'm just curious. Do you agree with that? Do you have any opinions on that? Because you're actually British. I'm a jackass saying that. I'm an American.
Well, no. I mean, I've been out to the States a lot, and I always used to find that humor is humor. I think at the end of the day, the joke is always on someone. Every joke has a focal point, and to a large extent, every joke is in some way cruel as well, because there's a point of the joke. It's a person, or it's an idiom, or something like that. But I think the difference between America and the UK is the irony. Is that I think we're much happier laughing at ourselves, and that's probably why there's a difference to death. Is we probably joke about death a lot more than anyone else, because there's an irony in that. And I think with the Ricky Gervais, I don't know if you're aware of the series called Afterlife.
Oh yeah, loved it.
Yeah, which is basically a widower, isn't it? I mean, it's not meant to be a comedy.
No.
And there aren't actually the only funny things in it are actually the outtakes.
Yeah,
that the irony is that we're able to we're quite introspective. We can laugh at ourselves, I think, better than most, and I think that comes from a confidence in your. I think because the British are viewed as a very comedic society by everybody. And so I don't think we need to prove ourselves. So a lot of our comedy is kind of downplayed. Then it's not outwardly for laughs. It's more it's a comedy about the situation, or the David Brent character, the same one you had with in the States, is he's the biggest idiot in the room.
Yeah.
And I think most comedic characters are almost, they're complete sociopaths, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
If they got it, it wouldn't be funny, would it? It's the denial of their pitiful existence that we find so funny.
Yeah. And it's funny because you talked about proving yourself, and I used to teach ESL, and I would say America is in its early years as a country, so we're kind of like teenagers, which is exactly what a teenager is always doing, proving themselves. So yeah, that does gel with me a lot. And I think now is a good time to ask you the standard question on the podcast, because you did mention the meaning of life. And, we kind of put a slight twist on that, which is, what is the meaning of death? And the way we reach it is, what do you think is going to happen to you specifically, Colin, when you die?
Well, I think I'm going to quote Ricky on this one, because I think being dead is exactly the same as not being born for me. Is that I remember nothing of the world in 1920 because I wasn't born, and I'll know nothing of the world when I die because I won't be around. That's not to say my DNA might not be around, and the atoms that make me won't be around, because they will be around, but they just won't be forming me. They'll be forming something else. Could be a daffodil, could be a spoon, could be anything. So I don't think there's, death is the end as far as I'm concerned. And if you go going to start talking about death not being the end, I think where do you draw the line? What animals don't have life after death? I mean, do you get down to amoeba? I mean, you've got trillions and trillions and trillions of life forms ever existed on the earth. You know, you can't have them all living on after death.
Yeah.
So the simple answer is that where death ends everything for me.
And I respect that answer a lot. And I think it's funny because like I can see why people would think the word humanist is misleading, but I actually find that to be the definition of a humanist, which is like we're all equal and we're all just here, and then when you depart,
make the most of it while you're here.
Yeah. So that certainly doesn't offend me, and it actually is, I think, a great term for it.
It might help you. I have a piece, and I usually, which might surprise you, I don't dismiss the afterlife in my services.
Mm-hmm.
I always say that I say that these services are inclusive and they're for everyone, whether they have faith or not. And I'd say that I don't believe there's an afterlife, but I don't know. I can't prove there isn't an afterlife any more than anyone can prove there is. So I just say, what a beautiful notion that our loved ones die and then they meet their loved ones in some other place. I think that's a beautiful notion. I don't think it's true, but if it was true, I'd love it. Yeah. I mean, I just don't think it can happen.
Well, and I think that's a smart hedge, too, just in case there is some pearly gate scenario that you and I both don't really believe in. I don't want to be on record saying,
No. Do you believe in it?
No, I don't. And I didn't before the podcast, and I don't after doing it. Few things have shifted in my perspective, which is I think of karma and reincarnation very differently than I ever did, and I'll never...
Right.
Be able to not see it that way, so that's kind of cool. And then the other thing is I'm more content in things not resolving than resolving, which is kind of what you were getting to with like what is 1920, who cares? Like, why do I care about World War One? Except in that people use it to make a conversational topic now about what we should do in air quotes World War III.
Yeah.
But I am actually interested on that line, and I didn't ask you if you have children, so if that plays into this, please let us know. But do you care about like the human race, so to speak, after you die? Like, would you like to do things to help it? Or are you just like, well, whatever, when I die, it's just whatever?
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
Well, I'd like to think I do, and I think there's I think some people in certain circumstances would call it virtue signaling, wouldn't they? But I drive an electric car, so I think, well, that's my bit. And there's other things I do, but I have children, have a daughter, and I don't want the world to be screwed up in 50 years' time, so that her children are going to struggle. So you think about some form of legacy, but other than that, I don't feel any great love for humanity per se, other than the people that I love, because I think, to a certain extent, we're doing a very good job of ruining things right now, aren't we? So, one way or another. Yeah. So, I mean, I think humanity is inherently good, but obviously there comes the dark side, doesn't there, as well?
Yeah, and it's interesting, and it's when you talk, I'm speaking from being an American, when you're an American and you talk to someone in Britain, and I would figure it works in both directions, we have like so much in common, especially with like our footprint, our fingerprint on the world, and then also like people's faith in us to run the show and keep it orderly and keep it going, which is also constantly being attacked, and I can see every side of that. So it's not that I'm getting into geopolitical particulars, but I am curious, like, do you ever feel like a conscience as a person from a nation? Like, does that ever play into your feelings as a human?
No. And I actually, I feel very, I don't, obviously there are some divisions in this country, as you probably know. But we have England, we have Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. If someone said, "What are you?" I wouldn't say I'm English. I'd say I'm British, and then I'd say I'm European, and then I might say I'm English after all that, because I think the biggest problem we have is nationalism, and that usually comes as a result of suffering, economic suffering or whatever brings upon. You want to find someone to blame. So I don't have a great love of my country, but I have a great love of the fact that we should be decent people and we should be good to each other, and that's probably everywhere. I mean, I think throughout the world, you hear these awful stories about Russia, but I bet you Russian people are as good as we are. It's just that their government is awful, And I think that probably pervades throughout the world, to be honest.
Yeah, no, this is hilarious. My wife is normally on all these calls because she's our producer, but she's pregnant, so we've given her a little bit of a maternity leave. But she would be rolling her eyes, not because what you're saying isn't true, but because it sounds like you and I have been best friends for years, because that's pretty much exactly how I feel. And my favorite writer ever is Kurt Vonnegut Jr., and he is a humanist, and he feels the same way. And it's hard. That's why I asked the question the way I did, because nationalism does get into play, and people just want to like label us,
and it becomes tribal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, your country is very tribal at the moment.
Oh God, yeah.
UK less so, but you can actually draw a line across the states, and you can almost predict what the view would be on this side of the state line and on the other side.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have that, because ours is more of an economic division.
It's gotten so bad here. People divide like wedding tables the way that you just talked. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
With regards to the work you've been doing for the last 4 years, do you ever like feel like you're able to resolve like family tensions? So this has nothing to do with politics, but it has to do with, human to human tensions. Like, are there ever situations where you're able to get like a brother and a sister who haven't talked in years to be okay, like things like that?
I've made that happen. Whether it lasted or not, I don't know. I mean, I've had situations where families, one particularly 2 or 3 years ago, where they couldn't agree who was going to talk to me. The family was so split. And they eventually came up with a compromise. And they started speaking to each other, but I'm pretty convinced that after the service they went their separate ways again. And to a certain extent, sometimes it brings in more divisions, doesn't it? The grief kind of heightens awareness, and puts people in a dark place. It's a bit like selling your house. It usually brings out the worst in you. And I think with grief, because you've got all the animosity and vitriol brought to head, because you've got to say this, you've got the ex-wife there, you've got his kids who are not talking, and it's just they're all being forced into this room they don't want to be in. And how it's the fight or the flight. And I think that they may have been putting on an act, but I'm pretty sure also that when it all ended, they went their separate ways again. So you can't. I don't really see myself resolving. I'm not there to resolve conflict.
Yeah,
we don't have enough time. You don't have enough time in this podcast either. But I think there are other ways we can bring a sense of peace to people and perhaps help put things in perspective better. But you started this conversation with a great line. Because I always say, people say to me, what's this about? And I say, funeral services are totally about the living. The dead are gone. And we are just trying to give them a moment to grieve, to allow that grief to happen. Because it's very important, I think. We've got a lot of low-cost funeral services in the UK, and I'm sure you have in the States, where it all looks very homogenous, and they turn up with an urn, and that's great, but there's no grieving point, and everyone's left looking at a vase. And it should be more than that. We should have a point where we can join together and share our grief, share some memories, and try and make the best of what time we've got left.
Yeah, wow. That's very well said. And since you've been doing this and you've seen all that you've seen, has it changed your own plans for your own funeral and like what you want your daughter presumably to do and things like that?
Oh, yes. 100%. I was firmly fixed on cremation. And now I'm 100%. I don't know if you call it that over there, like a woodland burial.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we actually just interviewed someone about this, like composting we call it here, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think the idea of being put back into the earth, because you're cremated, your DNA is gone. You are wiped off the face of the earth like you never existed. It doesn't matter what technology you've got. You've got someone's ashes. There's no way you can tell what those ashes once were. No way. But when you're buried, your DNA goes back into the soil. And I think there's something quite cathartic about it, even though you're dead. I think this nice thing, well, I've come from nothing, but rather than burning me, I'm just going to be put back from whence I came. Because we all came from the soil anyway, didn't we, in one way or another?
Yeah.
So that has changed my view, yes.
That's cool. That's really interesting to hear, because I didn't expect that at all. I thought you were going to say you wanted to be embalmed and have people walk by and see you, so that was cool. That was
I want to be cryogenically frozen.
Yeah. What else has changed then? What's like the biggest other change in your life that has come from this work?
There's actually a downside to it. The downside is I've feeling I've become a bit of a sociopath myself. So I'm sometimes disturbed by the fact that I'm not affected directly by other people's grief to the point that I'm not able to continue the service, or I'm getting upset. And yet I can watch some films and I'll be in a flood of tears. Yet when I'm confronted with reality, it doesn't seem to affect me. I don't know if it's because I'm trying to be professional, or I put a big screen up. But I've probably done a lot of mental preparation before it to make sure that you have to concentrate on the work you have to do, because I'm running the service. So if I get upset or fall apart, the whole thing falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
But it has worried me that I don't get upset. And I was surprised, been certain circumstances, well, that was a tough one, but it's like, I don't know, I might get PTSD one day, I don't know. But yeah, that's the downside, is that I thought I'd be more emotionally involved than I am. That doesn't sound too bad.
That's very interesting, because actually the same thing started to happen with hospice with me, and I didn't realize it until it was kind of too late.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just kind of like...
Interesting.
Especially like when a natural disaster happens and like I find out a lot of people died,
Yeah.
I kind of fall into that Stalin quote of like, it's a statistic.
People die.
Yeah.
It's like, it's random, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people say to me, "Oh, life is cruel," and I say, "No, life is just random. There's no fate. There's no one up there controlling our lives. There's no privileged right to live to an old age. There is nothing. It's just purely random, and we have to accept that, I'm afraid. But of course, we're always, as humans, we're always trying to look for significance in things that actually have no significance, other than, as you just correctly quoted, statistics, which is what it all is, really, at the end of the day, isn't it?"
Yeah, and what do you feel about like people like Ray Kurzweil, who are like investing heavily and also promulgating, I can never say that word, constantly speaking and trying to get people interested in not just cryogenic freezing, but actually more advanced things like downloading consciousness and like extending your life into a replicatory body and things like that?
Yeah, why? It's like, you just... It's almost like if everybody knew they had another life coming, can you imagine how different our lives would be? If everyone knew that there was going to be something after this and they would be able to change things, I think we'd be a different kind of society. It would almost be anarchic, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, you watch these Groundhog Day. That's what it would be like. Yep, Groundhog Day. You're going to wake up the next day. Okay, Bill Murray was in the same body. But I think you're selling... It's not how humanity should be. You shouldn't be looking to live forever. You should be grateful for the time you have got, because, I mean, I don't know, you talk about statistics. What's the odds of you actually being you? Are like billions to one. You look at all the eggs, all the sperms. You should be so grateful that you came out into the life, because the odds against it were astronomical.
Yeah, and you reminded me of a stand-up comedian I heard the other night. So this is not my joke, but he appropriately said, I'm so happy I just turned 45 and I finally don't constantly need to like masturbate and look at women and just, I can like calm down and relax. And I think that's almost in a weird way a metaphor for what we're talking about, which is you should have twilight years and there should be an expiration date, and it makes you value a lot of things. And
yeah,
especially when I see my parents with their grandchildren, like I see how beautiful that is to see those two ends together,
Yeah. I mean, we are sentient, but don't forget, nearly just about every other life form on Earth over the millennia hasn't been sentient. So the something living on that doesn't even know it's alive seems a bit stupid, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Colin, you're amazing, and you're really funny, and you're natural, and I love the work you do. We're running up to the end of the interview, but I always like to give my guests a chance to have the floor. So what would you like to tell our audience?
Well, I would say to them all, I don't know where they are, what they do, but I'll make some sweeping generalizations. I think the fact that they're listening to this probably means they're fairly decent people, because we care about emotions and our fellow humans' emotions. And I would say to everyone, try and be kind to each other, and try and not to judge too quickly. I mean, in the past have been very judgmental. I try and be less judgmental, see why people are like they are. It's the old adage about never judge someone till you've walked in their shoes. I mean, I'd like them to be decent shoes, by the way. I wouldn't want to be flip-flops or something like that. If I'm going to have to walk in someone else's shoes, I'd like to be quite comfortable. But I don't think we should judge them without doing that.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, and I think in this world we need it now more than ever. And it was interesting to hear your perspectives on the UK compared to America, and the fact that you've traveled here, because it's hard to be here on this continent right now, or in this country in particular, and we feel isolated, we are isolated, so we'll see how it goes. But Colin Finch, thank you so much for coming on the show. If you have something that you want people to contact you about, I'll put any links in the notes that you tell us to. But otherwise, just know, everyone, that there's a friendly, awesome humanist living out there. His name is Colin Finch, and he's a funeral celebrant, and we probably need more celebrants in this world, because life and death are not to be shunned or feared, and they're supposed to be lived and enjoyed. So this has been another episode of Coffin Talk. If you want to support the show, please head over to mikeyop.com, that's MIKEYOPP.com, and sign up for my free weekly letter that's designed to make you laugh and think. And thank you again for listening. My name is Mike Oppenheim. This has been another episode of Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.